Hello, tango tribes around the world. Welcome back to Drago's Tango Alley. This is your host, Alejandro Drago. And in this video, we will analyze the etude number 3 from the collection of 6 etudes for solo flute or violin by Astor Piazzolla. Probably this was the most awaited video, given that etude number 3 is the most popular, at least among violinists. And it consists of 3 sections, A, B, and A prima, or A apostrophe. The A prima section is almost identical to the A section. Maybe it's actually even totally identical. So we will analyze sections A and B, assuming that everything that you will learn about section A will apply to section A prima. They contrast in tempo and character. So the section A is quite active, rhythmic. It's based on a 3-3-2 pattern for the most part. It has some characteristic gestures that we will analyze as well as the bowings that go to those gestures. And the central section B is lyrical in character, and there is a little bit of linear polyphony in that there are 2 virtual voices or 2 registers that are engaged in a continuous dialogue. We will analyze that as well. So without further ado, let's go to section A. What we see here is the beginning of the etude number 3. I took the liberty of erasing the tempo mark to create a little bit more of space. The first line, here, is the first 2 bars exactly as they are presented in the etude. So if we were to understand these slurs and dots and whatnot as bowings, we would be in a paradoxical situation, because we would be ending this down, starting this up, separating this 2, which is quite unviolinistic, and then we would have this like this, up and down, and starting up. So there are a lot of contradictions, both from the point of view of standard violin technique and from the point of view of tango practices. Well, clearly these are flute articulations, flute tongings. Those are not violin bowings, and certainly not tango bowings. Below there are 2 options here. I play the first one, but I consider the second one also viable. We take this down up twice, and this is a very characteristic gesture that we will address in a second. And these 2, instead of playing them in one bow, we play them still connected by playing this flat on the string and this lifting with that up bow, okay? And that allows us to start the next bar down bow, flat note, and also, without disconnecting, we start the slur, connecting to this note where we lift. We have a nice accent down and 2 ups. And this results into a very tangoistic gesture. Now, if for whatever reason you are really committed to slurring these 2, meaning playing them in one bow, well, first of all, I would ask of your kindness that you chip a little bit of the second note of the slur. That would be more idiomatic. And then, since you have committed to playing this accent up bow, well, be good at doing it. Nice clean accent, but then the continuation of the articulation goes essentially as follows. I think they are both viable. I prefer this one, but I certainly believe this is not something to be blindly obeyed as if it were a bowing, because it is not. So let's go a little deeper into the bowing of the beginning of Etude number 3. This is a very characteristic bowing. 2 slurred, 1 up. Now, you can find a similar bowing in classical music. Take, for example, right? And it's not necessarily that different, but there are certain specific characteristics, mechanic and technical characteristics of this, and a certain diapason of possibilities that are specific to this bowing. So let's start with the attack. Classical musicians tend to be very clean, very careful about their attacks, and so are tango musicians. Just the standards are a little different. Here, we want a certain degree of bite. So rather than going for that kind of soft, clean landing, I would use or peruse even a little bit of bite. So there is a certain verticality of the bow that goes together with the attack. You don't necessarily have to sustain that. If I may use that word, a little bit of a slap or crash attack, right? Which is completed or complemented with an ending of the slur that has some lift, some lifting and even cutting of the sound. So we can just let the sound drop or yank the sound out. So as you see, we have on one side a range of attack possibilities from softer, more standard classical to more bitten or bit English, more toothy, I would say. On the other hand, we can have a smoother ending or a more yanked out ending, and I will illustrate it. We can have, say, let's ignore the attack, or so, and again, I'm showing the diapason, and as the music evolves and moves on, we need to find how much of what we want to do. Now, as for the third note, yes, of course, we catch the note and lift the bow and prepare the next attack. So. Okay. So what can we do in order to develop this and explore these possibilities? Well, the same you would do if confronted with an unusual bowing formula in classical music. You pick your scales and you start practicing it as a pattern. So you may as well do etc. Or just go up along the scale. Etc. I, of course, need to address the last two notes. As I pointed out, or at least implied, while I break it down into two bows, that doesn't mean I break the connection. I take the first one to be on the string or into the instrument, flat, and the second one connected as it exits off the instrument, off the string. So repeat it for you. And as I said, you can practice that formula on uh, any material, any scale. I don't know. I imagine that you could even practice Kreutzer that way. I don't know. The point being that we need to get a familiarity with the wrist and finger work of the right hand and the cyclic character of this bowing, because of course we want to have control over the specific part of the bow in which you want to play it. Now, in a tango composition of a more traditional character, um, I would normally play this pattern much lower in the bow. But in this etude, that might not be entirely practical for a number of reasons. As you move on down the flow of the etude, certain things demand that you be a little closer to the middle. But in an abstract context, or a context that doesn't present me with demands of relocation of the bow, redeployment of the bow, I would go rather with a really traditional sort of bowing here. Oops, I hit the roof, I'm sorry. So, and you will find in the violin tango literature and the tango orchestra literature lots of examples, and I would like to offer you an extreme example of this when this articulation, even if for one cell, is taken to an extreme, which is La Yumba by Osvaldo Pugliese, in which you have this. Okay, so you have this really clean attack, well, clean from the point of view of tango, really lifted second note and extreme staccato separate notes. Just an example. So we have the overall structure here, and thus I would like to go to the next prominent gesture in this piece, which has a direct relationship to the bandoneon technique. Well, here we see what would be the second part of the A section. And the second part has these four gestures, very well-defined gestures that we will analyze briefly. Let's go over their characteristics. So they are almost identical in structure with some subtle differences. Number 1 and 2 start with a chromatic descending scale. Number 3 has a diatonic harmonic scale, clearly suggesting a modulation to D minor here. And the fourth gesture has, as it's marked already, an ascending scale. So we have that. And pretty much that's the only difference. Those scales in each case lead to a long held note indicated forte with fermata, with an accent, and with crescendo. Furthermore, each time it ends with a breathing point. I will try, not to erase the rest of indications. So we can see that all those characteristics, the fermata, the accent, the comma, the forte, and the crescendo, are present there. We can see that clearly in each instance. Now, out of context, that may seem a little bit of a capricious thing to do, but this is a very characteristic bandoneon gesture. There is this drop down, with the exception of this one, of course, and then a higher note which is held, sustained, and increased in intensity, in potency, in force, right, in punch, and then is abruptly cut to uh, give entrance, or to allow the rhythm to carry on. It's like a rhythmic dam of sorts that holds the flow of rhythm to liberate it, to free it, okay? And very interestingly, in 3 out of the 4 instances, this happens with a Q note, which is another typical bandoneon gesture, to take some notes with a Q note from a higher note, usually a perfect octave. And here, although we don't have the Q note, we have this ornamental little element. So let's see how we do this on the violin. Okay, so let's take it from this passage. So first of all, I think that in the chromatic descending quintuplet, we should use the same principle I discussed in Etude number 2, the quasi-glissando chromatic fingering. With a well-sustained bow. So we catch the accent and lift, and same. Okay, so there are plenty of examples in the bandoneon literature and in Piazzolla's own performances that would serve as a good guide regarding how to play these sort of cuts of long notes. Milonga del Ángel comes to mind. I will try to indicate in the comment section, well, not only the link, but exactly at what point that famous cut happens, because there is a modulation there, and it's very illustrative of this sort of gesture. So I think that these two things address the main articulation characteristics of the A section. Let's transition now to the B section, the central slow section. Here we see the central section, or B section, of Etude number 3. The central section of Etude number 3 has 2 layers, and in turn it consists of essentially the same phrase, the same 2-layer phrase, simply repeated. In its second iteration, the phrase is very slightly more ornamental. So let's go over this first from a formal point of view. What are those 2 layers? Well, the base layer, let's see if we can get, there we go. The base layer is indicated with the light blue and purple squares. So you have it here, 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 here. Well, this has been split because of the line jump. Here, 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 and here, right? So, and if you take it separately, so you have la, la, sol, sol, fa, 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 mi, la, and then it repeats, as I said, in a slightly more ornamental way. La, mi, fa, fa, sol, mi, fa, do, fa, fa, mi. But basically is this sort of Phrygian cadence bass, which is so characteristic to a lot of Spanish music and to a lot of Argentinian music as well. So this bass line is contrasted, on the other hand, let's pick another color here, say red, with a little melodic gesture, which seems to work on around a fixed interval. Little expansion. Again. In a last expansion toward a coda that closes the phrase, right? So we have this EC interval with some additional notes and rhythms here, here, and here, right? Until we hit this E and we resolve down to a new iteration of this with now some rhythmic variations. For example, this dot and a more energetic dotting here. Ton, tari, darari. Well, the ornamentation here. Tari, tari, darari, with the triplet. Then shorter pickup, another triplet, and the descending line that brings us to the re-exposition. Now, let's go back to the blank slate. As I said, there are two layers and two halves or two sections of this. At the tempo primo, here, we go on to essentially repeat the phrase. But since it has more variation, more ornamentation, and being a repetition is by definition an enrichment, or should be, there is more intensity. I believe that it is a great idea to differentiate the first lower layer, which I indicated all on the D string, and the second lower layer, which is more ornamented and being, in my opinion, of a more passionate character, should be on the G string. So if you look at the lower layer, the squared, let me see, I hope you see the mouse, the squared groups of notes, this first section or first half happens all on the D string, and this section happens all on the G string. So let's see how that works in performance. Let's see what possibilities present to us here. Okay, so I think there is a lot to say here. Please note that in the first half, we always have these separate pickups, okay? So up bow, and with the exception of the slide from G to F sharp, we have which allows us to go about this with a certain cadentiousness. The pickups in the second half are different. First of all, and I'm always talking about the lower layer, okay? They allow us, by the fact of playing on the G string, some glissandi. There you have another example of the semi-glissando chromatic fingering. And this one, the transition from C to F, it's quite expressive because you see, Piazzolla was supposed to be composing for flute, and he didn't even bother to write out a chromatic scale. In his mind, the underlying sound or model of sound for that jump was a glissando, either a double bass glissando or a violin glissando. So this clearly was written with a string instrument in mind, and we should do likewise. So, for example, let me show the hand better. Huh? Okay, and in the next one. That's regarding the lower layer. As for the upper layer, I just played a rather very classical way. When I play this in concert, I tend to vary a little bit more. Yes, I do add notes and ornamentations and change the rhythms. Go figure. This sort of improvisation or ornamentation is an intrinsic stylistic and idiomatic part of it. But even if you decide to stick with the notes, we can use resources that we discussed in etude number 2, namely the combination of bow vibrato, non-vibrato, and left hand vibrato. So you can... and you can increase the use of those resources in the second half. Please know that even though it's not written out, I take the note previous to the syncopation to be lifted. So when we play, okay, I don't think of this in terms of that would be very traditional cantabile, very nice, beautiful, but not quite, in my opinion, stylistically. Same would apply to second half, but the bowings are different, the rhythmics are a little different, and the higher amount of notes allows for more rubatoing. Again, there are many different ways of playing this. I suggest that you consult Piazzolla's own performances of his own music. I will try to come up with some interesting links for you in the comment section and reference section. Now, let's, before we finish this video today, let's go over a couple of performance and technical details of interest, particularly for the violinist. Finally, before finishing this video, I wanted to briefly touch upon 3 little details, things that in my master classes come up all the time, and I think it would be useful for everybody, as I said before, to have a reference. However, it is impossible to go over every single detail. This needs to be built on your own experience on this material, your practice, and of course on an overall base of knowledge about Piazzolla's work and tango in general. So I hope you will consider subscribing to the video courses from Eurindia Edizioni that will be available online for tango performance practices from the Eurindia Tango Academy before the end of this year. So the first passage I wanted to address, which you should be seeing now, is this in the second line of the piece. And I wanted to point out that the best way I found to play this is to start down the scale and making a point of catching the fifth between the A and the E with the third finger. You don't have time to move that finger around. And of course, the slide between the C and the B is not a shift, it's just a finger slide. Now, this entails playing up bow, the next group, but it is justified. And you will have to compact your position a little bit to play the D, F, A flat, and E natural with separate fingers. That's just one of the tips I wanted to address. The next one is a passage that I play with a harmonic on the G string. Okay? As you see, in this case, I take the end of the pattern, tia, ta, tia, ta, tia. I do slur it so that I can take the harmonic with a slide up. And then at the tip of the bow, I take, and then from the first position. So, and keep going with the etude. Finally, and you should be seeing it now, here this sequence of paired slurred notes in broken thirds is a very characteristic Piazzollian and bandoneonistic sequence, but it's one that appears right before this variolage, which is difficulted by the fact that is a 3/16 bar embedded into 4/4. So you need all of your bow and all of your wrist technique there, but definitely you need to start the third bar of this example somewhere close to the frog. So here the useful and the advantageous and meet the needed, okay? Meaning that we can maximally, idiomatically do the paired notes by just half retaking up bow, I will show that, and by those means gain bow to be ready for the big variolage. So we are, and you're ready. Okay, I'll do it again to show the kind of articulation we're doing here. Okay, I strongly suggest that you pick a fingering that suits you. I do a combination of first and second position here, but pick each of the slurred thirds on one and the same string, one and the same position. Do not cross strings within these slurs. Well, that's going to be it about etude number 3. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found useful material here, and I will see you again when we address the lyrical etude number 4. All the best, stay healthy, stay active, stay cheerful.